Hello, this is Nicolina, and this is my analysis and interpretation of the poem Aftermath. Firstly, I'm going to be looking at the form and structure, and in general, the poem is constructed by three stanzas, with 9 lines in the first, 6 lines in the second, and 8 lines in the last stanza. The poem is constructed by a certain rhyme scheme, and the rhyme scheme is based upon the continuous use of end rhymes. For example, in stanza 1, we have days and way. In stanza 2, we have stench and trench. And lastly, in stanza 3, attack and back. And this structural end of word is a reflection of the particular poem's rhyme scheme, which in this case, as illustrated on the PowerPoint, goes A, B, B, C, C, D, E, A, A in stanza 1, and A, A, B, B, C, C in stanza 2, and lastly A, B, B, A, C, C, D, D in stanza 3. Furthermore, there are many ways in which the stanzas can be linked in a poem, but in this case, the stanzas are primarily linked through enjambment, exemplified by the following in stanza 1, line 4 to 5. And the haunted gap in your mind has filled with thoughts that flow like clouds in the lit heaven of life, and you're a man reprieved to go. And this continues throughout the poem in stanza 2, line 3 to 4, and in stanza 3, line 4 to 6. And by using enjambment as a tool to link the stanzas, the poet somewhat establishes a pace for the poem. Moving on, we can also look into the narration. And the speaker of this poem is told from a third person narrative. This can, for instance, be seen by the following lines in stanza 2. It says, and dawn coming, dirty white, and chill with a hopeless rain. Do you ever stop and ask, is it all going to happen again? By narrating the poem through a third person narrative, narrator, it creates a sense of like kind of universal validity. The grim aspects of war and or in all its brutality, it's not just isolated to a specific person or incident, but rather the war affects the entire world and also all human life just trying to get by during those dark times. Thereby, the writer, through a third person narrative, underlines the general universal validity of war and how it will always affect around, roughly the entire human race in some different aspects. And then I will also just give a quick example of some of the poetic language in the poem. And an example of this is a simile in stanza 1, and it goes like this. And the haunted gap in your mind has filled with thoughts that flow, like clouds in the lit heaven of life. So this is also the quote that we read previously, but this is a simile between thoughts and how thoughts can appear in the mind like clouds appear in the sky. And the use of more poetic language and especially imagery, it creates a more vivid depiction of, in this case, a mind left with some kind of gap, possibly conflicted by acts of war. And furthermore, this simile also emphasizes how the writer can use a simile or something completely different in the aspects of poetic language as a tool to convey the reader of their message, some kind of message they're trying to send through the language. Then I'm also going to dive into some of the themes and messages in this poem. I would say that the overall subject is war. And through some of the poetic language that we talked about previously, the poem deals with very harsh subjects like war and what war can potentially do to a person. And this is underlined through the constant repetition of some specific lines like, do you remember? And Have you forgotten yet? Through these specific lines, the poem kind of stresses the importance of remembrance. It is crucial that you remember the gruesomeness of the trenches that he states, like the trenches, the rotting corpses, and the anger pulsating through your body during the war. This can be based on a general intention that, with a particular focus on remembrance, this could potentially be a way to prevent it from happening again. If only like everybody remembered the horrors and the death that follows with war, well then maybe, just maybe, people would not turn to it as often as they do nowadays. And even in times of political distress, it wouldn't maybe be used as much as a political tool to regain or maintain power. So an overall message is like, through remembrance and remembering the horrors that war brings, then this could maybe be a way to prevent it from potentially happening in the future. In relation to this, it moves along to the title, and the title provides the reader with yet another aspect of war and what it can do to people. A lot of the men returning from the war might not have suffered severe physical impairment, but instead they are dealing with a very troubled mind, and in some way actually a wounded mind that has suffered some damage after experiencing some truly gruesome things that you could not even begin to imagine. And just in brief, the title can therefore be seen as a way to provoke the reader to really consider the real life aftermath of war and how this can define the rest of people's life, and at not least what witnessing death and destruction can do to the human psyche.